In the wake of the arrest of Tommy Robinson and the protests surrounding his rapid incarceration, I feel it is prudent, instead of, as the UK government and the Met are doing, addressing the secondary factor that is Robinson, that I address the issue that is driving him, and attempt to identify the issues with Islam in the UK as a whole in terms of crime, and then lay out why this issue has emerged and what can be done to solve it. First of all, the background on Islamic saturation in the UK. Muslims accounted in 2011 for a little over 4% of the total population. It is also the fastest growing religion in the UK, although this is likely due to the fact that the Muslim birth rate is around 10 times that of non-Muslims. The majority of these Muslims are of Pakistani descent, which accounts for 2% of the total UK population and about half of Islamic adherents. This is relevant later. Despite their relatively low population count, Muslims are overrepresented in prisons. 15.2% of prisoners in 2016 identified as Islamic, with 30% of those claiming to have been converted within the system, some of which were only doing so for the benefits allotted to them for being Muslim, for protection. Excluding these in-house converts, as it were, Muslims are overrepresented to the tune of 2 to 3 times what their national population would suggest. If this did not already raise alarm bells as to the doctrine of fundamentalist Islam, which contains the justification for many of the crimes that these men and women are incarcerated for, it has become increasingly evident that this overrepresentation is an underestimate of crime prevalence perpetrated by Muslims, particularly in the areas of sexual exploitation, rape and assault. Telford, Rochdale, Rotherham. All of these were, and arguably are, the sites of child grooming and rape gangs. 97% of these abuses and offences have been perpetrated by Pakistani and Asian descended men that ascribe to Islam. These crimes amounted over nearly 40 years, and the reason for them not being adequately policed is that the officers did not wish to be thought of as racist. Similarly, Child Protective Service agents have been revealed to be complicit or engaged in similar activity, listing child victims as prostitutes and failing in their duty to protect their charges. So why has this happened? As I have mentioned, due to the large proportion of Asian men who were guilty of these crimes and their religion, the police have acted improperly, fearing cries of racism, and have created a two-tier policing system where those, like Robinson, who criticise Islam and the behaviours of their neighbours, have been given far more attention and heavy-handed policing than those committing the crimes that generate this position. Irrespective of how Tommy is behaving, the reasons for his outbursts, his activism, and his actions are legitimate problems that have not been addressed correctly. What is the solution? Is this a problem endemic to Islam? The liberal solution involves the liberalist principle of blind justice, where illiberal behaviours are not tolerated and all are treated equally under the law irrespective of creed or colour, where we emphasise that ideas and culture are not race and that not all cultures can be equal. Islam is a minority in the UK, and it contains within it methods and practices incompatible with the freedom of individuals, and this needs to be policed correctly. This removes the radical element from Islam, and it will retain only the moderates. Moderates will be fine, because they do not break the law. Islamic fundamentalism has been allowed to fester because our government and police have allowed it to. The Islamic lobby has craftily painted its internal issues as a product of racial discrimination in order to get away with its disproportionate crimes. This needs to stop being a factor, and the police need to remain colourblind in the carrying out of their duty. Fall back on area-based crime stats. It is not racist to have more boots on the ground in areas that overrepresent in crime. If those areas happen to be a particular demographic, well, boo-hoo, you're policing crime, not skin colour. It is an irrelevancy. Islam is an ideology, it is not a race, and parts of it are utterly untenable in a free society. Islam would be restricted into engaging with liberal behaviours merely by being correctly adjudicated. Let's look at the issue of grooming gangs again, now that we have established it as a problem perpetrated in the majority by Muslims. Why? 1. Because their book tells them they can do what they want to members of a foreign land. That's an idea. It's not something inherent in humanity. It's something they believe because of their book. 2. Because of the lack of policing of the behaviour that is inspired by this book, for fear of being tarred racist. The police's current response has been to pay off mosques and Muslim leaders to inform on potential radicals. But because the illiberal community within Islam has been allowed to thrive, and that such illiberals are now in positions of authority within that community, they have been paying extremists to propagate their views. We see this in mosques that radicalised or endorsed people like Abu Hamza and Andram Chowdhury, and in the massive population of Muslims who advocate for Sharia law. No-go zones have also been established that we need to take back with proper policing. It is fair to police areas that have higher than average crime with a higher than average presence. Ideology and culture are not arbitrary characteristics like race or sex, but a list of behaviours and practices, some of which are viable or unviable, and people need to continually emphasise this difference to take back nonsense words like Islamophobe. You may as well call someone a Toryphobe or a liberal phobe. Disagreement is not phobia. Concurrently, we need to raise the level of policing on antisocial behaviours and crime in the no-go zones, as it is clearly sorely needed. More boots on the ground, more cops on the beat. Finally, and this is a secondary but still important factor, we need to ensure that integration is happening in these communities that are comprised primarily of migrants. No more segregated cultures. This means, for example, that Sharia courts need to be outlawed entirely, they need to be criminalised. That English is enforced as the language that lessons are taught in schools, apart from language lessons of course. I'm sure more examples can be pulled, but you understand my intent here. The idea is that Islam is able to exist concurrently with British culture, not apart from it. Islam is a protected community politically, and because they can get away with behaviour that attracts the dregs of society and the worst of the worst, as we see with abusive social service workers, the upright are leaving because they cannot stand the depravity, or they do stand up and are then torn down by those with influence calling them racist. This is why blind justice is so powerful a principle and why it needs to be enforced. If you allow any community to be able to act with impunity, then you will have these issues. It just so happens that fundamentalist Islamism, is a particularly malicious ideology. Distrust of radical Islam and an awareness of fundamentalist Islamism needs to be taken forward into our prison system. The radicalisation of existing felons is only compounding the problem. I am not sure how to adequately combat this issue myself, but perhaps those of you watching will enlighten me in the comments. Thank you for listening.